Welcome everybody to the first of our series, How to Live Well, Religion, Law and Community. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, first cab off the rank, Dr. Mark Jennings, who is going to speak to us on living well in pluralist societies. Mark has for many years taught at Murdoch University in the area of religion in Australian society, and he's Director of Continuing Education at Wollaston Theological College. As a sociologist of religion, his areas of research include Pentecostal Charismatic Christianity, LGBTQI+ and religion, and also the whole area of secularisation. So thank you, Mark, for coming to speak with us. And I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, your password. I wouldn't applaud yet. Wait till you hear me, and then maybe, or maybe not. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them, and the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. You can be forgiven for wondering why I'm beginning as the lecture on the pluralist ways to live well with something from the Jewish tradition. Hopefully that will become clearer. You can't see the screen, don't worry, there's mainly just pictures for you to look at. An elderly man was walking through the city square when he spotted a friend. The old man had somewhere to be, fairly urgently in fact, but not to greet someone he was on good terms with was unthinkable. The two men inevitably began talking about their plans for the day and where they were each going, and it turned out they were going to the same place, the local magistrate. The younger man was incredulous to hear that his older acquaintance was being summoned to appear to answer charges, and even offered to help him in his defence. The older man thanked him and asked him his business with the magistrate. Was he also being summoned, or was he seeking to bring a charge against someone else? And now it was the elder's turn to be astonished, as he learned that the younger man was in fact seeking charges of murder against his own father. The story was this: the father discovered a labourer had killed a colleague on their property, and having secured the murderer, had gone to find the appropriate authorities. However, the killer died from exposure before charges could be laid, and it was for this reason that the younger man was seeking to bring charges in turn against his father for leaving the labourer to die. The elder was shocked but fascinated. In their city, bringing such a charge against a parent was considered a very serious dishonour to both father and son. Nevertheless, the younger man insisted bringing this charge against his own father was the correct thing to do. In fact, the pious thing to do, since the young man claimed special knowledge as to what pleased the gods of their city. And this, he claimed, was precisely what piety demanded, doing what was pleasing, what was beloved by their gods. This was too much for the elder man, who simply could not allow such a fascinating learning opportunity to pass him by. Despite the urgency of his imminent appointment, he continued conversing with his younger acquaintance, eager to discover from him the nature of piety, what pleases the gods. After all, what could be greater than knowing what was beloved of the gods and then doing it? However, he was confused when the young man, maintaining his possession of his special knowledge, began enumerating examples of pious deeds and actions. The old man demurred. This simply would not do. Pious deeds were all well and good, but the knowledge craved by our protagonist was not of what deeds were pious, but what the pious, the good itself was, in its essence, what made good deeds good. The young man tried to restate his answer that what was pious or good in essence was what was beloved by the gods. But the elder was still not satisfied. If one God thought the young man's charges against his father were good, just look at that scene. If one man thought the young man's charges against the father were good, wasn't there a chance that another God might have a different view? What was needed was not a litany of things that each God liked, but knowledge of what was good in itself. If the good was what was beloved by the gods, then this could never be one thing. Alternatively, however, if it could be demonstrated that the opposite was the case, that the gods loved the good precisely because it was good in its essence, well, that would deal with the issue. What was good would not be a matter of each god's idiosyncratic preference. Thor likes this, Loki likes this. But there would be something substantial, something essential that was pious or good, that the gods loved precisely for the reason that it was good. The younger man conceded this, but the elder relentlessly brought him back to the question, what then is that? What is this good that is so beloved by the gods? It is possible that the elder was so caught up in puzzling this out that he clean forgot where he was supposed to be. The younger man, increasingly unable to answer his neighbour's questions, eventually just excused himself and left. As you may have figured out by now, the elder man is known to history as Socrates, and the conversation I've referenced here took place, according to Plato, Socrates' most famous pupil, in the agora, or the marketplace of Athens. Socrates did end up going to the magistrate in Athens later that day, where he presented his famous apologia, his defence for what he had come to view as his vocation, namely, attempting through dialogues not unlike the one I have described here to find true wisdom. The jury of Athens rejected his defence and in fact sentenced him to death, and it is not without irony that Socrates' conviction was for impiety or offence against the gods. The young man Socrates encountered in the agora, who eventually abandoned Socrates to his musings, was Euthyphro, and the dialogue I've just related to you bears his name as its title. When he was alive, so Plato tells us, Socrates' practice was to interrogate other citizens in Athens in his never-ending, divinely ordained quest to seek wisdom. This so consumed him that he could be completely absorbed in trying to discover the nature of the good on the very day he was facing serious charges which would lead to his death. Although Euthyphro left before Socrates could discover the essence of piety, we can be assured of two things. One is that Socrates believed with absolute and unshakable conviction that seeking the answer to this question was imperative to what he would call in his apology an examined life, the life of an individual who was not simply living as a beast in the wild, but as a free human, one who participated in the rule and the life of the polis, literally one who was political, homo politicus. Questions concerning what was good were not mere abstractions, but ideas known to the gods, which would render life in the polis, the city-state, good, just, perfect. The Romans would later be absorbed in bread and circuses, amusements for a mob who exercised no authority in their absurdly overpopulated city, not for Greeks like Socrates, who relished the weighty deliberations of self-rule and the examined life. This was a group of people who watched Oedipus Rex and thought of it as entertainment. This was the only way to live. The second thing we know is that no matter how long Socrates had kept poor Euthyphro cornered in the agora, answering his questions, he would never have figured out what the essence of the good is. Some knowledge is only privy to the gods. This was, of course, the sure foundation upon which the pre-modern world was built. Human beings were limited, and there were subsequently limits to what we, could know. The gods, or God, from the Christian era onward, knew all and saw everything as it truly is. That world, which is not available to us now except in literature and ancient texts, held in tension these seemingly opposed ideas. The good, or the just, can only be fully known by God, yet it is a human responsibility to seek it out and to manifest it as fully as possible. And it's not just the Greeks who understood this. If anything, the Hebrew prophetic tradition is animated by this tension even more strongly. Amos's impassioned plea for justice, which we began with, implies that the Israelite community was giving God what they thought God wanted, and they could not have been more wrong. They thought God wanted festivals, offerings, songs, when what Yahweh really required was justice. Even though they were clearly unaware of this, the prophet Amos does not let them or us off the hook. We need to search for the good and attempt to implement it in our society. And when we lose it, as we inevitably will, because we cannot truly know it as God does, go on seeking for it again. Even though we can never fully know, we're responsible for knowing as best we can, and not just knowing, because the good is something to be implemented rather than an abstraction. In other words, it must be something we do, not merely something we know abstractly of. We don't live in the world of Socrates. We don't live in a world in which it is commonly held that the gods have perfect knowledge of the good and that humans have a responsibility to know and implement the good, even in a limited way. In fact, talking about the good in itself is a bit of a problem. We don't tend to think that way anymore. The theologian historian Brad Gregory describes the change we've witnessed in modernity as a transformation from a substantive morality of the good to a formal morality of rights. What does he mean? The adjective substantive refers to the content of something, what it constitutes. What is substantive has substance, as the word suggests. Socrates seeks from Euthyphro a substantive answer to the question, what is the pious? He doesn't want examples of the pious, but what the pious is, what the good is in its essence, in its substance. The good has this essence, even if the fullness of this essence can only be known by the gods, for Socrates and Euthyphro, or God in the Christian tradition. The contrast Brad Gregory points to as our present reality is a formal morality of rights. Formal in this sense has no substance. It's more akin to a scaffolding. What is formal is empty, available to be filled by any substance or content we might find for them. Now, this may seem like a subtle distinction. If the full knowledge of the good is unknowable to humans, are we not working with formal morality anyway? We seek the good, we believe we've discovered it, we implement it and instantiate it, we lose it, we repeat. After all, it is not as if humans have consistently agreed to what we think the good actually is anyway. That particular tussle is played out not only between Socrates and Euthyphro, but also Moses and Pharaoh, David and Saul, Jesus and Caiaphas, Peter and Paul, Martin Luther and Pope Leo X, all the way through to whatever happened last weekend at your place. You may think it's a subtle distinction, but it actually makes all the difference in the world. And I can illustrate why using another concept, Utopia. Utopia was a word invented by St. Thomas More, and it means either no place or good place. Utopias existed long before Thomas More. Famous examples, to refer to the Greeks again, include Plato's Republic, or, closer to home, what Jesus called either the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, depending on which evangelist you're reading. As no places, utopias cannot exist in this world. They are ideals that we can aim for and do aim for, even if we don't think we can ever fully achieve them. In this sense, utopias are very much like the pre-modern idea of the good. We can never fully achieve it, but because it is there, even if we can't ever see it fully or reach it, we can aspire to it and do our utmost with the limited knowledge we have to instantiate it. If we take that idea away, and we largely have, then there is actually nothing we're commonly striving for anymore. So what do we aim at when a common idea of the good is no longer in view? Today, human societies are animated by a belief, as Gregory said, in formal human rights rather than substantive goods, or substantive good, apologies. What can we say about human rights? We talk very easily about this concept today as if there is general agreement about what it means. The idea is actually fairly recent. The famous United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights was published in 1948. That title, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, implies at the very least that this is a standard which is supposed to apply across cultures universally. The fact that it could not possibly be regarded as applying across history is easily demonstrable in that the declaration in Article 4, for example, prohibits slavery, which would have been a nonsense in the ancient world. This means that quite an extraordinary shift has occurred from a time when slavery was regarded as common and a relatively uncontroversial practice, which is never challenged in the Bible, for example, to our present situation where slavery, while certainly still practiced, is regarded as a violation of a universal right. What happened? One possible answer to this is offered by the aforementioned Brad Gregory, who finds the origin of this epochal shift in the European Reformations. Prior to the Reformations, the medieval ideal, if seldom realised, hence an ideal, was based in an understanding of humanity that was grounded in the thought of Plato's most famous student, Aristotle. This meant, among other things, that the good should be understood in terms of telos. Telos being the ideal, what something was meant to be. Moral behaviour was to be directed not only by what one desires, but also what one is made to be. Thank you. What is good or virtuous is that which humans are meant to achieve. It is good in its essence, exactly what Socrates was interrogating Euthyphro about. In medieval thought, ethical teaching was dominated by inculcation of the virtues, which were to be learned from the story of Christ and the saints and practiced in imitation of these. Enter the magisterial reformers, who had a very strong view of human depravity, the idea that people are inveterate sinners, unable to do good without the assistance of God's grace. Human beings could not then be expected to develop moral habits simply through imitation, as in the medieval worldview, but would have to simply be kept in line by secular authorities coercively enforcing morality through the law. Furthermore, one's individual conscience and rights assumed a new importance in light of these reformations. To quote Gregory again, with the splintering of post-Reformation Christianity in Western Europe, no longer could a single community claim to hold in common the idea of the good, because individuals disagreed about the meaning of God's word and continue to do so. Individuals and not politically favoured churches were and had to be the bearers of rights, beginning with the right to religious liberty. More on that vexed word in a minute. If we throw this into the mix, into this mix, the beginning of secularism, which Brad Gregory, as a good Catholic, also blames on the Reformation, incidentally, the axiomatic acceptance of the existence of God as creator was abandoned. Once upon a time, everybody believed in God. It is known, to use Game of Thrones kind of language. That's no longer the case. This means there was no longer any reason to assume that human beings are made for any goal. Telos disappears entirely, and all that is left is efficient causality, that which makes something begin. Has nothing to do with its end. To cut a very much longer story considerably shorter, this means that there is no essential human nature and no natural human good. which is where we are. And this is as it probably must be in a pluralist world with one God, or many gods, or no God. And frankly, if this is all correct, it's astonishing how well we've managed with a concept Jeremy Bentham once referred to as nonsense on stilts. The idea that we all have individual, inalienable, human rights. I suspect, and I'm not alone here, that our idea of what should constitute rights is still conditioned by the Christian idea of the good, which grounded European societies for better and worse, better or worse, and there's an awful lot of both, prior to modernity. Be that as it may, what all this means is that we arguably inhabit societies where what might be considered how to live well is contested as it has not been for a long time, perhaps not since Socrates' interrogation of Euthyphro. There is no shared telos of humanity, no substantive ideal of what we should be finishing up as. The good very often ends up being the not bad. Modern liberalism, which in the West is a worldview imbibed so readily with our mother's milk that we rarely, if ever, perceive it as anything other than natural, is largely predicated on formal, or what Berlin calls negative liberty. The individual should be totally at liberty in society to do whatever they want to do, and whatever that is should be regarded as right and just, as long as that does not impinge upon the freedom of another. Sound familiar? Sound like the way things are? That's the claim. That's the world we inherited. The negative liberty of modern liberalism leads to a subjective, highly individualised morality. Now, it may be that we have objections to this, particularly if we continue to hold stubbornly to the view that humanity and everything else are created by God, and that we have a responsibility to God and each other to seek the good and try to implement it to the extent that we can. That's not necessarily incompatible with negative liberty, as long as you can manage to seek and attempt to implement the good without impinging upon the liberty of others. The radical endgame of modern liberalism, however, neoliberalism, attempts to remove the human out of the picture and replaces the medieval God, with perfect knowledge, with a demonic caricature, the all-knowing market, who determines the good through consumption and the free interplay of market forces. So liberalism ain't liberalism, at least not for much longer. The arena here, then, is not only competing ideas of what constitutes justice, but the foundation of these claims. I believe, as one example, passionately, that Australia's asylum seeker policy for nearly all of the time since 2001 has been unjust, cruel, and despicable. Others can and do agree with me, but based on what? Cruelty is bad? Why is it bad? Is it empirically verifiable as bad? How would that even work? Would I need to attach a pain meter? I mean, I'd have to invent one first, to an asylum seeker and measure their pain, nominating a particular threshold as being unjust, but everything prior to that as being within limits? Or should morality be put to a vote, as Triple J, the radio station, infamously did when they conducted a poll on whether 2 Australians on death row in Bali should be put to death, which, as you probably know, they subsequently were? Is morality simply what the majority says it is? What does the market think? Oh, that's right, Gordon Gekko told us greed is good, so I guess immoral is the new moral. At this point, perhaps I sound like Gandalf's Stormcrow, announcing glumly the end of Christendom, or perhaps with a little bit more theatre, Western civilization, and the beginning of secularist enemy. Not at all. As I've already said, I remain convinced Western ideas of justice and rights continue to be animated by Christian ideas and ideals, if for no other reason than nothing better has been found to replace them. If Western civilization lies here buried, it is in very shallow sand. Where does this leave us in regard to our theme, living well in pluralist societies? For Socrates and Amos, justice was not an abstraction, but concrete political reality, We might say today that justice is what politics and morality meet. How might it be possible to make justice a realisable political possibility today for you and your community? How can you live well for yourself and others, since living well is a political act in an era when we no longer have any ideal of a common good? Don't know. We know some things that aren't working. We have at the moment a federal government deeply ideologically committed to neoliberalism, evident in their refusal to support universities during the COVID pandemic and the decision to increase HECS fees for students studying humanities, courses that do not necessarily lead to job-ready graduates who can fit seamlessly into the machinery of the economy. That is not a moral vision, nor does it have much to do with rights, other than the dubious right to choose a course of study that will ostensibly lead to gainful employment. Spoilers, it doesn't, and it won't. Sorry. I mention this particular decision not only because I have a personal stake in university education, but it displays the naked machinations of neoliberalism, which turns out to have nothing to do with liberty of any kind. Neoliberalism is in fact animated by an idea of the good, what is good for the market, which is eternal and forever praised. Amen. That is clearly a dead end. So we stumble on, responsible for the limited knowledge we have, to imagine something we can't even think anymore, a common good. This good in a multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multi-everything society like Australia will not be found in any particular creed, sorry again, but that certainly does not mean ancient and not so ancient wisdom has nothing to teach us. If nothing else, it allows us to imagine another world which presumes the possibility that the one we have now, the way things are, is not how it has to be. The late and unlamented Margaret Thatcher was wrong. There is an alternative. We could do a lot worse than where we started with Amos. So, we play the hand we've been dealt, which is what responsible human beings must do. There is hope, even if I'm not positive what it is yet. Ante up. Thank you. I think you can shoot your questions if you would like. Libica.
Hold on, Libica.
No, it's coming.
What I found really this sound is really bad here. What is really interesting, the title for the talk in a way included law, and you actually did not address that.
It's true.
Which you could, and I thought you are going to, because that was precisely what Socrates said. He has to die because once we claim the law is law for everybody, he cannot escape because it would be against the law. And it was just interesting that because you were going down this road, and I thought you are going to actually mention it. That's all, it's just a comment.
Yes, thank you, Libica. I think if we talked more about apologia, I probably would have done that. But just to jump off the comment, I'm just, for some reason, came into my mind instantly a few things. Two terrible movies. Not that I wasn't listening to your question, but the terrible movies are Fight Club, which is dreadful, and the book is worse. Like, it's a terrible movie, all right? I don't care what people think, it's a cult film. It's awful, and the book is actually worse than the film. which is really, really hard to do. And the other terrible film is the Joker, which came out last year. And the reason I was thinking about those as Lubica was talking, and I was also thinking about what happened in the United States in the aftermath of the recent election, is that's a vision that's profoundly anti-law. Both of those books, both of those films, and what happened there was, yes, let's imagine some kind of good for ourselves and eradicate everything else. It's kind of a very nihilistic vision. So what happens at the end of both of those films and what happens there. There's an idea of the good, probably a little bit more in the riots at the Capitol Dome. There's an idea of the good, but actually really what they wanted to do, as far as I can work out, is simply destroy everything. That's certainly what happens in Fight Club and the Joker. The Joker, I don't know what you've been told about it, I don't know if you've seen it. Yes, we all think Joaquin Phoenix was wonderful, whatever. The end of the film ends in just pure nihilism. There's nothing left, there's just chaos. And that is certainly not what I'm advocating today. So yes, I think whatever our common idea is, I agree. Socrates was somebody who, as you know, decided, even if it was a crime against philosophy, which is what Plato regarded it as, he was going to live according to the law of the city under whose protection he'd lived his whole life. And so he took his own life in accordance with that law.
I think I'm going to ask this each week.
You're going to have to ask it so I can hear you.
Do you think that human beings need religion to stop us from becoming too moralistic? I'm thinking of various trial by social media experiences that seem to be happening in the kind of public consciousness. Do you think we almost need religion to temper, Siri's trying to answer, to try and temper some of that moralistic tendency?
I didn't expect the question to end there. So the idea that we need religion because otherwise we'll not be too moral, but to be too moralistic. That's fascinating. As you were talking, I was thinking about, again, I was listening, but I was thinking about somebody who presents a profoundly other moral vision, or really tries to present one, I think, what might have happened if there hadn't been Christianity. And that's, of course, Nietzsche. So when he presents on the genealogy of morality, and he wants to say to the people, to his contemporaries, you want to imagine a world without Christianity, this is what it looks like. And I think for most people it's kind of a little bit scary. In terms of your question, that's really fascinating, the idea that So what would, I mean, I don't want this to turn into necessarily a dialogue, but I mean, it sounds like the idea is there's a little bit more compassion, a little bit more grace, a little bit more understanding that we're all fallen, perhaps, or all limited in a way that maybe doesn't exist necessarily outside of faith. That's a really interesting observation. So secularists, atheists, agnostics in the room, I think the priest of this parish just blamed cancel culture on lack of faith. So make of that what you will. Very interesting. I'm not sure. Yes, sir. I think the gain needs to be turned down soon. The gain on that microphone's terrible.
Thank you. I was interested in your original assertion that Socrates' primary motivation was teleological, or purpose, rather than ontological, of being. Surely his principal interest was whether we are being or we are becoming. And if we're becoming, then there's hope for humanity, presumably.
I can't hear you, sorry, what's that last
If
part?
we're becoming, there's hope for humanity.
Look, I certainly hope there is hope for humanity. I'm certainly not standing up here, I hope. I've used the word 3 times now, just in my reply, in the earlier lines of it, that we're not just waiting for either the return of Christ or, the friendly meteor to hit. That's certainly not the vision that I'm trying to present. In fact, I think what I am saying is that in Socrates' worldview, there is a good. There is perfect knowledge of the good. But those things in their fullness are not available to human beings. That's all. So I think he's certainly interested in the being of the good. And in terms of what I said about responsibility, I guess that relates to what you're saying about becoming. Because when one knows what one does of the good, one is then responsible to carry it out in the limited way one can. So that's about, I think, becoming. And to me, morality is about becoming, not just being static.
Thank you for your excellent talk. I have a sort of sociological question, really. What I take to be the main point of your talk is the disappearance of agreement about the good in the modern world.
The disappearance of our what?
Agreement about the good, about what counts as the good. And I wonder whether there is good sociological evidence of this, right? So when you ask people about their values, how much dispute and disagreement do you really find? And can you give us an empirical grounding for that sort of claim?
Nope. Okay, a longer answer. I think the idea of interrogating what values are is fraught. People attempt it. It's fraught because there has to be a point at which we actually agree on what values are. So one of the examples I used in here was the poll that Triple J, this is a while ago now, they put out a poll on their radio station Hack, and the question of the poll was, should these 2 men who ended up being executed, 2 members of the Bali Nine in Bali, should they be executed? Should they actually be subject to the law? And more people who answered the poll, which is, of course, is the other part of the empirical side of things that's fraught, because not everybody answers sociologists' questions, as much as I keep badgering them to. There's a lot of people who just don't answer the questions, so we have to extrapolate from that. But the majority of people who did respond to the poll, so Triple J listeners, did actually think that the 2 should be executed, which I think highlights part of the issue for me. Ethics in our traditions have never been a function of what's popular. I think neoliberalism tends to that because what we're living through now is an idea that what is in demand, what is quantifiable and in high demand is necessarily the good. So I think that's a form of reasoning that's actually predicated on that idea that we can somehow quantify what is good, or maybe not what is good. Maybe they would never use that kind of language, I'm not sure, but just what is in demand is good, or as Gordon Gekko put it, greed is good. But I think you're asking something else about what we can know about different values and different approaches, and there are, as you're probably aware, a number of poles in play. But to give you another example, and forgive me for giving you so many examples of why I'm not giving you an answer to your question, but to give you another example, say for example, and this is just really off the top of my head, we were to offer a poll and somehow we got everybody, or a significant enough portion to be statistically useful, to answer the poll, what are your views on whether something particularly ethically contentious, like abortion, what are your views on whether this is allowable or should be prohibited? Even if we got an answer to that, it would be an answer that would be in very raw numerical terms. We would get 45% say yes, it should be prohibited, 55% say no, for example. That wouldn't necessarily tell us anything about the value underlying those decisions. Sorry. Yes. I can probably hear you better without it, but that's true, and let's be fair to everybody.
Just going back to what Alan asked about in relation, which went to then your answer about the Barley 9 poll. Don't you think there was a similarity in those people saying, voting that the law should be obeyed, as the same as what Socrates did? In other words, just holding to that principle of the law having to be obeyed. And
sorry.
There you've got, yeah. I thought there was a similarity between the story you gave us about Socrates agreeing to go to his death because that was the law and he believed the law needed to be obeyed. And isn't there a similarity there between those people who took that harsh position, unethical, but in relation to the law of that country, they took the same position as Socrates took. So there's the divide between ethics and the law. And I thought, as Christians, we get this, that we have to both obey the law, but also obey the ethics of the right to life. And
I heard it much clearer. I'm going to keep doing that with more questions. No, I'm just going to answer it. So the question was, in relation to my example of the Barley 9, is that not a similar example to Socrates? And in relation to your question, Libica, that Socrates was essentially obeying the law of the land, and that, so the majority of Triple J listeners would agree that the law of the land was carried out and should be carried out upon the two men who were executed. Turns out I could have used that. It would have been much easier than drawing an example out of thin air like abortion. I could have just used the death penalty. Why didn't I do that? But I guess what I was objecting to was not, and I want to come back to that because it's really interesting. What I was objecting to is the idea that ethics can be a function of a poll. We can say, okay, 100 people think this is moral and one person thinks it isn't. Does that make it any less or more moral? Well, according to our tradition, that's never been the case. Ethics has never been a function of simple numbers. But in terms of the question, and this is something that I heard and I may have misheard, but we could say, okay, that executing people is immoral. I'm not saying that necessarily, but we could say that we need to carry out the law of the land, but it's immoral. But there'd be equally people of the same faith, or the same creed, or the same whatever, who would disagree with that, who would say that no, the death penalty is definitely moral. And this goes to my answer before. In terms of underlying values, it's actually very difficult to tell what people's values are based on this, on an answer to particular questions. How do you feel about abortion? We can't, this is something else that I was saying, in a pluralist society we can no longer assume a common base. We can no longer say, okay, well this person agrees with everything that I do because we're all Anglican, or we're all Catholic, or we're all Hindu, or we're all Epicurean, whatever the case may be. So that's, I guess, we can look at what empirical evidence tells us a little bit about what people value, but I don't think it tells us anything about values, is what I'm trying to say, about what we think of as the good. But that's controversial. Raymond. Thanks, Raymond. I'm actually a fan of Signal, not because I like Elon Musk, by the way. I could take or leave the guy, but yeah, take your point about WhatsApp. In terms of a more substantial answer to the question, is actually the question I was really trying to pose. What is, to use your phrase, the moral compass? Where are we finding the good? So thank you for your question, but it's my question as well. I think the two examples you offered at the beginning of your question, technocrats and government, well, we've never trusted them with moral compasses or good. Never. It seems like this is the first time in history, particularly with technocrats, that we're kind of saying, yeah, we're gonna handball everything off to the market and let the market decide, and that's gonna be what is good because it's just too hard. But what I am trying to say is, A, that hasn't worked so far, and B, it doesn't have to be that way. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest points, or most significant points that I was trying to make. This is not just the way things are. It is the way things are, but it's not the way they have to be. Now, I wish that I could articulate a very positive vision, which would run counter to the whole idea of negative liberty, by the way, which is against positive visions, because as soon as you start talking in terms of let's do this and this is the good, then all of a sudden there's this whole other group of people who are like, no, that's not the good at all. And then you're kind of in the position, this is Isaiah Berlin's argument, by the way. Once that happens, then you have to say to that group of people, well, we know what the good is and we're going to impose it on you, and hence we get all sorts of nasty things happening. But that's a very binary schema, the idea that either that has to happen or the negative liberty has to happen. I think something else could happen. I'm reaching for it very inarticulately and inchoately because I don't know what it is. But I believe, and this is my hope, that it's there. Monty.
Hey, Mark. Oh. I was just wondering, like, if you were to give a one-sentence answer to that question, how to live well, like there's a little child in front of you, how would you, on a personal level, answer that?
Well, if it was one of your children, who are also my godsons, I would probably, as you know, particularly to Theo, deliver the whole lecture again. I know. I would say, imagine something else, because this is going to be a little bit longer than a sentence. Imagine something else, because you've been dealt a hand, and you've got to play that hand. But in an egregious kind of mixed metaphor, which I can do with your kids because they're under 10, I would say, you play the hand you're dealt, but this doesn't have to be the way the game... Oh, no, that's the same metaphor. It doesn't have to be the way the game ends. It could be different. Imagine something else. So there's 3 words. Imagine something else. Because the way things are is not the way things have to be. This is the world you were born into. It doesn't have to be the world. And when I say that, I don't mean... Sorry, this is getting really long now. When I say that, I would never ever say to them, it's your responsibility all on your own to change the world all on your own, or even change your world all on your own. I think that's an idea that's really been co-opted lately to devolve some of the groups Raymond was talking about, particularly government, of their responsibilities. Now, that's not what I'm saying. Just imagine, maybe that's all you can do at the moment. And it can be. Sorry.
It falls to me to thank Mark very much for his talk. He's raised the questions and the complexities of this issue as to what is good, particularly in our multi-valent society. So thank you very much, Mark, for introducing this to us. And this is on behalf of...
Thanks, Steve.
In the next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at the question of how to live well from various perspectives of different faiths and no faith at all. So next week, Rabbi Pluralistic, who was the rabbi at the Perth congregation and has done a lot in interfaith circles, is going to come and speak to us on how to live well from a Jewish perspective. So we look forward to that and hope to see you next week. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Well, that's good. Thank you, Mark. That's really good, this stuff. Yeah,